Hello everyone. So let's look at the current affairs for this week. So first news is related to Naxalism. Why this news has surfaced? Because we have officially become Naxal free country. So what is Naxalism? Naxalism basically believes in the extreme ideology which tries to overthrow the government through violent means and guerrilla warfare. This is Naxalism. How it has started and what is the origin of Naxalism? So first of all, it has started in 1967 in the Naxalbari district of West Bengal. What is their ideology? They carry out armed rebellion basically, which is against the state. This is against the state. In 2004, CPI, the Communist Party of India, which had Maoist ideology, emerged as the principal left-wing organization to it, which further fuels the elements of Naxalism in the country. Why it had persisted at the first place? The question arises. So first of all, there is lack of governance in certain areas which are geographically, you can say, isolated with respect to the mainstream country. Second, the tribal alienation, because they are distinct in their culture and they don't assimilate easily with the mainstream country. Then land and forest grievances. Time and again we see the lands are being taken away of the tribals and they are not being sufficiently compensated for that, which reduces them to the passive citizen, to the status of passive citizens. So to kind of like express their grievances, they started coming up with extreme ideologies and extreme actions. Then poverty remains one of the important issue, and underdevelopment of certain regions, so they lag behind in the development as compared to the rest of the parts of the country. Then there is difficult terrain, so they some regions they kind of remain out of the reach of the people. Then weak connectivity is there as compared to, see, Rajdhani, from ruling from Rajdhani or national capital say to the extreme areas becomes sometimes difficult. So forces, people and governance must reach over there to look into the development of such regions so that they are not left behind in the process of development. Then there is lack of welfare delivery. The schemes, they get deprived of the schemes because they don't even have the awareness about what the government is initiating, how the government schemes are, how can they get benefit out of it. So they kind of are isolated from the rest of the country. So Naxalism usually is thrived in the areas where there is governance vacuums, but an integrated approach, if it comes into force, it can build lasting peace and sustaining peace in such areas. And we have already become Naxal free on 31st March and 2026. So in 2015 also we had come up with national policy and action plan for the left wing extremism. Then approach, we have shifted from security centric to security plus development plus governance, and integrated approach has come into force due to the changing evolution or changing socio-economic needs of the country. So now three pillars are there, three tools are there basically to do away with the Naxalism. First of all, Vishwas. Vishwas means building security and trust in such areas by increasing the security presence, intelligence led operations. CAPF and specialized forces have been demarcated with the dedicated task of like taking care in those areas. Then surrender and rehabilitation is there. Community outreach and engagement of the people to the mainstream has been there. Second tool is Nirman. Nirman means to build something. So infrastructure would be built up and connectivity would be enhanced in these areas to get a better reach of these people and these such areas. Like for example, building of roads, bridges and all weather connectivity should be there. Then mobile connectivity and the digital access, increasing the number of banks, ATMs and financial inclusion ultimately. Then building schools, hostels and skill centers in these areas so that they can study, they can have better health, education and employment opportunities. The people who are not deprived in development would not put to these means, that is guerrilla warfare, or you can say extreme ideology. They took to certain means because they are left with no other choice. So that's their majburi which urges them to go to such activities. healthcare and basic amenities if they are provided with health, education and employment. So there are very little chances of them being as Naxalites. So third pillar is Jan Kalyan. Jan Kalyan. Kalyan means welfare of the people, an integrated inclusive approach. Welfare plus inclusion by education and quality learning, giving them proper healthcare and nutrition, providing them proper livelihoods by skilling them and providing them jobs, tribal empowerment and inclusion, and effective delivery of the welfare schemes of the government. Then by various tools we will be able to achieve it, and we are implementing through various tools. First of all is technology, that is use of drones, satellite imagery, AI and data analytics. Supporting measures like financial disruption, NIA is there, ED is there, and state agencies are there to cut their funding and assets, so that the anti-national elements are not fueling the Naxalism anymore. Then community participation means assimilating them in the mainstream, like local ownership, cultural integration and trust building of these people. If they will build their, if they are able to build their trust in the government, there are very less chances of them being isolated. The core logic here is basically, if we create space for development, then this can lead to trust, and if trust is being built, it improves the welfare, and welfare ultimately strengthens the state legitimacy. So what are the key results basically? What have we done so far? First of all, let's look at the statistics. Left wing affected districts, they have been reduced from 126 to merely 2. Then most affected districts have been reduced from 35 to 0. Left wing incidents have been reduced from 870 to 234 from 2014 to 2025. Fatalities have been decreased from 310 to 100 from 2014 to 2025. Right? Then enhanced security presence, we have increased the security presence in these areas, because if security presence is increased, their confidence is being gained and state legitimacy increases, and there is better implementation of the welfare schemes. Then better connectivity, it like 96% villages in the most affected areas have made mobile connectivity, have now mobile connectivity. Financial inclusion, like increasing the bank branches, ATMs, bank correspondence and post offices. Surrender and rehabilitation, around 4,000 cadres have been surrendered from 2014 to 2026. Now ground level transformation, what we have actually done: increasing the security camps, increasing the roads and mobile connectivity. Banking and welfare access has also been expanded, education and healthcare has been given, and which has ultimately led to state presence and community integration. Now they feel connected, now they feel, you can say, acknowledged by the state. And 31st March 2026, government has officially declared India as Naxal free. From violence and fear to development and trust, a new era of peace and progress. You can use it as a concluding line with regards to mains. Now, what is the way forward? Ensuring sustainable peace. How can we ensure the sustainable peace? First of all, we need to maintain continuous security presence. I mean, it is not a episode that you do it once. We have to do it recurringly, like continuously, for a sustained peace. Then we should deepen the tribal empowerment, encourage bringing about certain schemes and making them aware about those schemes. Third is ensuring inclusive development, like focus on livelihoods, employment and their skill development. Then we should strengthen the local governance. How can we improve the local governance? By empowering gram sabhas and panchayati raj institutions. We can also build trust through good governance, which means last mile delivery of the welfare schemes, even at the remotest level of the country. Then addressing the emerging risks side by side, monitoring radicalization if there are certain antisocial elements which are emerging, so we should strike them then and there itself. Cyber propaganda and cross border linkages, so they should be taken care of. What is the takeaway for mains? Naxalism is not merely a law and order problem, right? It means security, plus development plus good governance plus tribal empowerment would collectively amount to sustainable internal security, which will ultimately prevent such actions and such activities. Next news is with regards to PM Viksit Bharat Rozgar Yojana. What is it all about? So the government is providing incentives to the employees and employers who are being you can say accommodated in the formal sector, and this is in various phases the money would be provided. So it is a total of 1 lakh crore scheme, and it has a targeted approach. The target is 3.5 crore jobs in 2 years will be created. What is important for prelims is the implementing agency, that is the EPFO, which comes under Ministry of Labor. Then the focus would be on employment and formalization and increasing the social security. So formal economy mein already the Indian workforce is very less in the formal economy. So to give them a motivation, that is why the government is coming up with respect to monetary benefits or monetary incentives. So incentivize first time employment. What is important is first time employment. The people who are assimilating in the formal economy for the very first time would be provided with these incentives. And the idea is to encourage the employers to create additional jobs. Two parts would be there, like I mentioned, for the employees and for the employers. The employees who have a salary of up to 1 lakh rupees per month would be given around 15,000 rupees in 2 installments. First installment would be provided after 6 months, and second installment would be provided after 12 months. Then part B includes the employers part. New employers with salary of up to 1 lakh rupees per month, incentives up to rupees 3,000 per month per additional employee would be provided to the employer. This will be for 2 years only, and maybe manufacturing, it can be extended in the third and fourth year. See, this scheme mainly focuses on the manufacturing sector, since we already lag behind in manufacturing. So to give them encouragement and motivation, this scheme has been introduced by the government. There would be DBT. DBT means direct benefit transfer to the accounts via Aadhaar bridge payment system. Then for employers, it will be PAN linked bank accounts. The transfer would be through PAN linked bank accounts. So if formal jobs are created, there will be better and more employment opportunity. We will be able to assimilate the public into the formal sector. Then what will happen? EPFO enrollment will be there, social security coverage will be there, higher income and higher consumption, which will ultimately enhance the economy of the country. Production will increase, investment will increase, which will ultimately boost the economy. And this will help in achieving our Viksit Bharat at 2047, which focuses on inclusive, self-reliant and developed India. So for prelims, the implementing agency is important, that is EPFO, and this is a first timer scheme. The people who are being assimilated in the formal economy are in the first time are only eligible for the scheme. The nodal ministry is Ministry of Labor. Next scheme is with regards to the amendment of registration of birth and death, Amendment Bill 2026, which has been recently amended by Parliament in August 2026, which replaces, or you can say the original bill finds its roots in the Registration of Birth and Death Act 1969. Then it was implemented I think in 2023, and now again it is being implemented. It is amended in August 2026. So now the amendment, they are related to the more staunch and more stricter provisions with regards to registration of birth and deaths in the country. So timely reporting would be there and reliable civil registration would be there. If a person delays for less than 1 year, then existing registration procedure will be valid for that person. If the delay is from 1 year to 2 years, then approval will be taken from DM or SDM or authorized executive magistrate. If the delay is for more than 2 years, if you are not able to register any birth and death for more than 2 years, then the order of judicial magistrate of first class is mandatory. Then only you will be able to register the birth and death of the respected person. Then what does it talks about? How will it benefit? First of all, registration of birth and deaths remains mandatory. They will be compulsory for everybody. Then it will provide legal identity. If it will timely upgrade the system about the birth and death, then it will prevent fraudulent entries and encourage the timely reporting of the births and deaths. Then it will strengthen the vital statistics for governance. I mean, if the government is updated from time to time, now it becomes easy for devolution of schemes, for devolution of initiatives, for devolution of funds. So smoother implementation and better administration is possible if there is timely upgradation of the data. Then why is it important? For accurate and verified population data, legal identities are maintained if they are properly there at place. Then welfare schemes, they will be better targeted and delivery would be enhanced. It will reduce the fraud and misuse of various government schemes. Then it supports data driven governance. If the data will be accurate, then it will be better, and it could we would be able to reach to the last mile in a better way. So 1969 Act, it was when we first started this. Then in 2023 amendment, digitalization of the records have been come into force, and this amendment gives more stricter laws and rules with regards to the delayed registration. Now what is important for UPSC prelims is registration of birth and deaths comes under concurrent list, and having in concurrent list means both center and state governments can make laws with regards to this subject, right? Next, Supreme Court has extended, just a second. So Supreme Court has extended the protection against domestic cruelty for live-in relationships. See, earlier what used to be there used to be narrow definition of domestic violence which could only save women from their respective husbands. But now Supreme Court has extended this blanket immunity, and it has taken wider interpretation of husband from husband to respondent. Now the women who are there in live-in relationships will also be protected against domestic violence. The earlier definition of Domestic Violence Act 2005 only talked of the husband, but now it has taken wider interpretation and better definition of the term husband. So Supreme Court, domestic cruelty protection extends to women in live-in relationships in the nature of marriage. In the nature of marriage means equals to live-in relationships. Earlier IPC 498 says cruelty by husband or relatives, but in 2023 it has been under Bharat Nyaya Sanhita 2023. Corresponding provisions are under sections 85 and 86. Traditionally the definition was limited to husband only, but now it has been extended to respondent. So what is the core issue? Legal status of marriage versus protection from domestic cruelty. If it is not a marriage, if it has not received the legal status of a marriage, then what? The cruelty is still being conducted on the women, then there has to be certain protection now. And as per constitution, it is our right to equality under Article 14. Then Article 15(3) talks of giving special provisions and special affirmative actions of the state towards women and other marginalized sections. Then Article 21 talks of right to life, dignity and privacy of the individuals. So to uphold all these rights, Supreme Court needs to intervene, and it has taken a better definition of the law. Then there have been various cases where different, you can say, definitions or different interpretations have been taken with regards to domestic violence. Like first of all, in D. Velusamy versus D. Pachamal case 2010, in this Supreme Court had laid down certain guidelines to determine whether a relationship is in the nature of marriage. In the nature of marriage means is similar to the nature of marriage and not as legal marriage only. Right? In Indra Sharma versus VKV Sharma case 2013, Supreme Court has distinguished marriage-like relationships from casual cohabitation. Casual cohabitation, say, the Supreme Court has observed a better and broad definition, and it had recognized the need to protect deserving women from domestic cruelty. Then in next case, Lalita Topo versus State of Jharkhand 2018. In this case, Supreme Court has held that women in the live-in relationships can seek relief under Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005. Then Navtej Singh Johar case talks of and reinforces constitutional values of dignity, body autonomy, privacy and individual choices. So protection against criminal law and domestic violence law flows from substance of the relationship and not merely the legal label. Not just people who are in a legal marriage will be protected or will be provided, you can say, immunity by the Supreme Court. Rather, it has taken a wider and broad definition of the same. So now it will help, it will protect the women from live-in relationships, from domestic violence of live-in relationships. So why the judgment matters? First of all, victim-centric justice could be there. Then substantive equality, and not just equality. Substantive equality means wherein it has broader definition. The definition is not limited to the words that have been there in previous acts. Domestic Violence Act of 2005. Progressive interpretations have been there because due to the changing socio-economic environment of the country, the definitions also needs to be upgraded to give a wider immunity to the public at large. It will strengthen definitely the dignity and liberty of the women, and it is also reiterated under Article 21, which talks of right to life and personal liberty. There are certain concerns and challenges like judicial outreach could be there, legal uncertainty, since there is ambiguity in the definition of various terms and possibility of misuse unless the scenario is not clear. What should be the way forward in this scenario? Legislative clarity should be there. The parliament should give proper guidelines and definitions and give concrete picture of the act. Then judicial guidelines must also be there at place along with the parliamentary guidelines. Awareness and accessibility should be enhanced, and capacity building to train the police and law enforcement agencies to handle such cases with proper sensitivity. This becomes important for mains point of view. Then recently, to increase the strength of the Supreme Court from 34 to 38 judges, so the parliament has come up with a bill, and surprisingly, to increase the strength of the judges, this bill has been passed by camouflaging it as a money bill, right? So that is why this has strike some debates regarding this. So proposal to increase the sanction strength of the Supreme Court judge by 4 through the money bill route. Right now we have 1 plus 33 judges in the Supreme Court. One is the CJI and plus 33 other judges. This was done in 2019. Now the parliament talks of increasing the judge strength. 4 more judges would be increased. So as per constitutional article 124A, parliament is empowered to increase the strength of the judges in the Supreme Court, right? Last it was done in 2019, and current proposal is to increase 4 more judges in the Supreme Court or in the apex court. So now question arises, what is a money bill? See, money bill comes under the article 110 of the Constitution. Now there are certain nuances with regards to money bill. First of all, it can only be introduced in the Lok Sabha. Second, Rajya Sabha has no as such powers with regards to money bill. It can only delay it for a maximum of 14 days and suggest various recommendations. The Lok Sabha may or may not accept the recommendations. Then the Speaker of the Lok Sabha certifies any bill to be a money bill or not, and the designation of Speaker is final, right? And usually what constitutes a money bill? If it is regarding the taxation, government expenditure, and if the expenditure is if the expenditure involves any money to be taken out of consolidated fund of India. So money bill, Lok Sabha is all the way more powerful and dominant, and Rajya Sabha scrutiny is limited. There have been various instances wherein a normal bill is passed by naming it as a money bill. So arguments in favor. What if we designate any normal bill as money bill and pass it from the money bill route? What will happen? Positives. First of all, it will lead to quicker expansion of judicial capacity. I mean, faster legislative process would be there. It will not be a delayed legislation. Then additional judges, the 4 additional judges to be taken, can help tackle the case pendency. There are crores of cases already pending with our judiciary. So to do away with the case pendency, we need more judges in the Supreme Court. Then it will strengthen the access to justice and timely disposal. Parliament has constitutional authority as per Article 124 that it can increase the strength of the Supreme Court judges. Now, what are the concerns? This money bill route may dilute bicameralism. Bicameralism means there are 2 houses of the parliament, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, and they try to keep a check on each other's power, on each other's arbitrary power. So basically this money bill reduces the position of of Rajya Sabha because it does not have much powers with regards to money bill. Then second, it raises questions regarding the scope of Article 110. I mean, what all bills should you include in the money bill, right? Then similar controversies have been arose because Aadhaar Act, Finance Act and PMLA Act, they all have been passed through money route only, money bill route only. Then there was a case, Roger Matthew versus South Indian Bank case, wherein money bill issue referred to a larger bench for authoritative determination. A larger bench should consider whether it is a money bill or not. What is the takeaway with regards to means? For prelims, this maybe not maybe not much important, but with regards to mains, how you need to balance the answer, how you need to approach the question. So judicial efficiency must be strengthened, but institutional efficiency should not come at the cost of parliamentary scrutiny and constitutional checks and balances. It should not reduce the power of Rajya Sabha, which is the second house, which reduces the status of bicameralism in the country. So we need to balance judicial capacity with constitutional propriety. That's it for today. Happy Independence Day. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.